6 months ago, the game Where's My Lunch was born out of the game maker's Toolkit game jam. The original game idea was to use bombs to move the player object around the scene to some sort of goal, trying to play on the game jam's theme of out of control. It was nothing too clever, but physics and explosions are generally good fun, and it seemed like a good starting point. Up to this point, every game or every project I've ever made in Unity was a 3D project, and Where's My Lunch was no different. It started as a 3D game with simple colored cubes and spheres pretending to be game art. It was clumsy and basic at first, but it felt like it had some real potential. That first evening, I started to work on the art style, and I needed something quick, simple, and hopefully not too hard to look at. After bumping around with a few ideas, I downloaded Fire Alpaca and started drawing stick figures. And for life of me, I can't remember why, I just did it. I tossed on a hat to add a little character, and Hank was born, and I was well on my way to making my first ever 2D game. With input from viewers as I streamed the game's progress, I added gravity wells and portals to the project to add even more physics-based chaos to the game. With the help of a clumsy but effective save system, I created a dozen playable levels. I was even able to add a sandbox level, which was another suggestion from a viewer. And with time running out in the 48-hour game jam, I did my best to fix a few bugs and pushed a build to itch. I submitted my efforts to the game jam, and I'd spent somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 hours working on the game, and I was pretty content with the results. The game finished in the top 10% of over 5,000 games submitted, which, while of course I was dreaming higher, and we all do, I have to admit it felt pretty darn good. With the results posted, I mentally closed up the project and didn't intend to come back to it. I'd learned a lot and had some fun. What more was there to do with this game? Like so many others, I've had projects come and go, with most not getting finished due to overscoped game ideas and lack of time to make those ideas a reality. And this is still a lesson I continue to struggle to learn. And so a few months after the game jam, the idea came along to polish and publish a small game while making video content along the way. I loved it. It seemed like a perfect project. I spent much of October and November planning out the project with an eye to keeping the scope small, but adding ideas and topics that might make useful videos and hopefully a more engaging game. I started work on a Notion page, which I much prefer to Trello, trying to find the balance between tasks that were too big or too small to help me plan out a bigger vision for the game. And if I'm honest, I've never forced myself to fully plan out a game in this level of detail. And the planning wasn't particularly fun. I had to actively fight the urge to open Unity and just get to work. I didn't list absolutely everything that needed to be done, but I got most of it, and I think the result was more than worth the effort. I knew the scope of the game, I knew what needed to get done next, and in some ways, I had a contract with myself as to what I was making with clear limits on that project. All of this had me hopeful that this project would have a different ending than so many of my past projects. With the planning all done, it was time for the fun part, opening up Unity and digging into that code. Most of the early hours spent with the code didn't make a big difference in the appearance or even the player experience. Much of that time was spent shoring up the underlying framework, making code more generic and more robust. I wanted to be able to add mechanics and features without breaking the game with each addition. We've all been there, and I hope you know what I'm talking about. While maybe not the highest standard, I've come to judge my own work by what needs to happen to add a new feature, how long that takes, and how much else breaks in the process. Does adding a new level to the game require rewriting game manager code, or manually adding a new UI button? Or can I simply add a game level object to a list and the game handles the rest? What about adding the ability to change the color of an object when the player selects it? Does that break the placement system? Does that result in messy code that will need to be modified for each new game item? Or can it be done by creating a simple, clean, and easy to use component that can be added to any and all selectable objects? Holding myself to the standard and working in a small scoped game has felt really good. It hasn't always been easy, and importantly, I don't think I could have held myself to that standard during the game jam. There simply wasn't time. For example, during the game jam, I wanted players to be able to place portals to solve a level, but in order for a portal to work, it needs to have a connection to another portal. The simplest solution was to create a prefab that was a parent object with two children portals. This means that when they were added, they were already connected. And while this worked, it also created all kinds of messy code to handle that structure, which meant I had all these if the object is a portal, then do this statement throughout the code. For me, those lines were red flags that the code wasn't clean and it was going to need some work. And fixing that was no small task. Every other game item was a single independent object. Plus, I knew I wanted to have other objects that could connect, like a lever and a gate or a lever and a fan. And the last thing I wanted to do was add a bunch more one-off if statements to handle all those special cases. My solution was to break the portals down into single unconnected objects and to allow the player to make connections by drawing the connection from one portal to another. And I really liked the results, especially in a hand-drawn game. But man, did it break things. It caused headaches and broke a poop ton of code in the process. That said, connecting the portals functionally was pretty easy. Drawing the lines wasn't too hard either. But updating the lines when one portal is moved or saving and loading that hand-drawn line, oof, that's a big hug. But it works, and the framework doesn't just work for portals, it works for any object. Simply change the number of allowed connections in the inspector for a given prefab, and it works. Adding the lever and gate object required 0 extra code in the connection system. Simply amazing. Now, to be honest, I've never fully understood the idea of a vertical slice of a game, and maybe that's because my games were too complex and I never got there. I don't know. But a couple months ago, it clicked. I understood the idea and why you would make a vertical slice. And then I heard someone else describe it, and I was back to not being so sure. So here's my definition. Maybe it's right, maybe it's not. I'm not sure I actually care, because what I did makes sense to me, it worked, and I do it again. To me, a vertical slice means getting all the systems working, making them general, making them ready to handle more content, making them robust and more flexible. For Where's My Lunch, that meant getting the save and load system working, debugging the placement system, making the UI adapt to new game elements without manual work, implementing Steamworks, adding Steam Workshop functionality, and a bunch of other bits that I've probably forgotten about at this point. To me, a vertical slice means I can add mechanics and features without breaking the game, and those additions are handled gracefully and as automated as possible. Now, maybe it's surprising, but adding new mechanics was actually pretty low on my to-do list. As I've started to reflect on this project as a whole, this may be one of the bigger things that I've learned. The only items lower on my to-do list are tasks such as finalizing the Steam store page, creating a trailer, and adding trading cards, things that all rely on adding more content to the game. So with the vertical slice looking good, I quickly added several new game items that weren't part of the Game Jam version. Speed zones, levers, gates, fans, spikes, and balloons, with a handful more still on the to-do list. Each game item took 2 or 3 hours, including the art, building the prefab, writing the code specific to that object. Each item then gets added to the game simply by dropping in the prefab to a list on a game manager and making sure there is a corresponding value or type of an enum that is used to identify and handle objects by other classes. And that is so satisfying. 100% I will revisit and tweak these new objects, but they work, and they didn't break anything when I added them. Again, simply amazing. So where does that leave the project? Well, I think this leaves still the hardest part of the project, and that is designing new levels. The plan from here on out is to use the level designer that's built into the game. That very same level that started as a sandbox or playground level in the Game Jam. To help make that process easier, I've added box selection, copy and paste, very basic undo functionality, and a handful of other quality of life improvements. My hope is that players will be inspired to create and share levels, and the easier those levels are to create, the more levels they'll create. I also want to add enough levels to keep players busy for a good long while. How long? I don't really know. It's scary to think about how many levels I might need to create for an hour or 2 hours or 5 hours of gameplay. While the framework is in place and gets more and more bug-free each day, there is still a lot of work to do, and a lot that needs to be created.